Hello everyone. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a haunted apartment? Let me tell you, it's not as fun as it sounds. Today, I'm sharing my personal story. One that started with excitement about a new place to live and quickly turned into a terrifying experience I never expected. It all started when my boyfriend and I decided to move in together. We found this cozy little apartment in a narrow alleyway off NGT Street in District 10. The location was perfect, close to the bustling LTT roundabout and convenient for both of our workplaces. It seemed like a dream. The apartment was part of a two-story house, with one large and one small room upstairs. At first, the only strange thing about the place was the small room. It was covered in cartoon-themed wallpaper, clearly meant for children. But we didn't think too much of it. On our first night, we set up our things in the larger room and decided to use the small room temporarily as storage. It wasn't long before we started experiencing odd things. The first few days, I felt an eerie heaviness in the apartment, especially around the small room. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination or nerves from the move. My boyfriend and I were busy with work, so we didn't spend much time at home, and that probably helped us avoid noticing more strange details. 3 nights after moving in, my boyfriend had to work late, so I stayed in the apartment alone. I had had a few drinks that night and was so tired that I just collapsed on the bed and fell asleep. I remember hearing faint knocking, 3 sharp raps, each repeated 3 times. I was too drunk and exhausted to react, so I just ignored it and drifted back to sleep. I figured it was just part of my dreams. The next morning, my boyfriend asked why I hadn't answered his calls or let him in when he came back. Apparently, he had been outside calling my phone and knocking for ages. But when I mentioned the strange knocking I had heard, we just laughed it off, thinking it was a silly coincidence. We brushed it aside and moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. Days went by, and we finally got the place more organized. We even invited some friends over for a small housewarming party. It was a fun evening filled with laughter, music, and great food. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, and the apartment was finally starting to feel like home. After everyone left, one of my boyfriend's friends called him, sounding nervous. He told my boyfriend that while leaving, he had seen 2 children playing in the kitchen, but there were no children at our party. He said he didn't want to scare anyone, so he kept quiet during the gathering. I was terrified. The friend's story reminded me of the knocking I had heard, and suddenly everything clicked. I realized that what I had brushed off as a coincidence was something much more sinister. We started to piece things together, including something the landlord had said when we first rented the place. He mentioned that many people who had rented the apartment didn't stay long. They always seemed to move out after 5 or 6 months, despite the apartment supposedly bringing good luck. That detail now seemed incredibly suspicious. We decided to ask around, talking to neighbors about the apartment. It turned out that the landlord had once lived there with his wife and 2 daughters, but the children had tragically died, and the wife had left, unable to cope with the memories. The neighbors told us the spirits of the 2 girls were said to still roam the house, and they described how the landlord had turned their old room into what we now knew as the small room with the cartoon wallpaper. It all made sense now. The small room, the eerie feeling, the knocking, and the children's presence. After that, things only got worse. We would hear footsteps at night, tiny footsteps running back and forth between the 2 upstairs rooms. The sound was unmistakable, like children playing tag. It would start at random hours, often waking us in the middle of the night. Our dog, an Alaskan Malamute, would sometimes bark non-stop at nothing, staring intently at empty walls or even acting like it was playing with an invisible friend. One night, the dog stared at the wall in the small room and wouldn't stop barking until we practically dragged it away. The atmosphere in the apartment became unbearably tense, and it felt like we were never really alone. We could feel a presence, something watching us from the shadows, always just out of sight. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. The constant tension, the feeling of being watched, and the strange occurrences were wearing me down. I begged my boyfriend to move. He tried to reassure me, saying that if we respected the spirits and made offerings, everything would be okay. We even bought incense and made a small ceremony, asking for peace. We placed offerings in the small room, lit candles, and prayed, hoping to appease whatever spirits lingered there. Things did calm down a bit after that. The knocking and footsteps stopped, but I always had the feeling that something was watching me, following me with unseen eyes. It felt like the spirits were simply tolerating our presence, but they weren't happy we were there. Despite the temporary peace, the atmosphere never truly lightened. There was always an underlying heaviness, a feeling that we were intruding on someone else's space. I couldn't sleep well, constantly waking up to every creak and groan of the old house. Sometimes, I would hear faint giggles or the sound of children running, and I would lie there frozen, too scared to move. My boyfriend tried his best to comfort me, but I knew he was feeling it too. He just didn't want to admit it. 6 months in, we broke up and I moved out immediately. The stress of living there had taken its toll on both of us, and we couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. A while later, I passed by the old apartment and noticed new tenants had moved in. They had hung bright lights and lit incense in the windows. I hoped that, maybe, they had found a way to make peace with whatever was haunting that place. I couldn't help but wonder if they would eventually experience the same things we had, or if the spirits would finally leave them alone. So, my advice to anyone out there: if you ever move into a new place, especially one with a mysterious past, always be respectful. You never know what may still be lingering in the shadows. The unseen world is real, and while some spirits might be harmless, others may not be. If you start noticing strange occurrences, don't ignore them. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is acknowledge the presence and show respect. After I moved out, I found a new place in a different part of the city. It was a modest apartment, nothing fancy, but it felt safe and warm. The difference was night and day. I finally started sleeping well again, and the weight that had been pressing down on me lifted. I realized just how much the haunted apartment had affected me. It wasn't just about the fear. It was the constant sense of unease, the stress that had seeped into every aspect of my life. Moving away from that place was like breaking free from invisible chains. Sometimes I still think about that apartment. I wonder if the spirits are still there, trapped in that small room. I wonder if they are angry or sad, or if they simply want to be remembered. I feel a pang of sympathy for them. 2 little girls who lost their lives too soon. Their presence reduced to whispers and shadows in an empty room. Maybe they just wanted someone to play with, someone to acknowledge them. I wish I could have done more for them, but I also know that staying there would have driven me to my breaking point. I heard from a friend that the new tenants eventually moved out, too. It seems no one can stay there for long. The apartment remains a revolving door of people coming and going, each of them leaving with their own version of the strange and eerie events that transpire within those walls. It's almost as if the spirits are trying to tell their story, to make sure no one forgets them. But the cycle continues, new people move in, and soon enough they move out. I've learned a lot from that experience. I used to think that ghost stories were just that, stories. But living in that haunted apartment made me realize that there is so much more to this world than what we can see and touch. There are forces we don't understand, things that exist beyond our comprehension. And while it's easy to dismiss these things as superstition or fantasy, it's much harder to do so when you've lived through it yourself. I hope my story serves as a reminder to be respectful of the unseen. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels wrong, trust your instincts. Sometimes, it's better to leave than to try to coexist with something you can't see or understand. And remember, not all spirits are friendly. Some might just want to be left alone, while others might resent your presence. It's important to be aware and to treat these situations with care. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more eerie tales like this one. Until next time, take care and be safe.